Maybe you've looked up at the night sky before that endless sea where humanity has always sent its dreams. But have you ever wondered, what if the real mysteries aren't above us, but beneath our feet? We walk upon a planet that feels familiar with its oceans, its mountains, its quiet cities glowing in the dark. Yet for centuries, some have believed that beneath this thin shell of soil and stone, there lies another world, vast, luminous, and alive. A place where the sun never sets, where ancient beings still walk among forests of crystal light. A place known by many names, Agartha, Shambhala, or simply the Hollow Earth. It sounds impossible, and yet, this idea once fascinated some of the brightest minds in history. Maps were drawn, expeditions planned, journals filled with whispers of a hidden realm breathing quietly beneath our own. Tonight, let's follow those whispers. Let's drift along the thin line between science and dream, between the sunlight above and the darkness below. Take a slow breath with me, and if you're listening right now, tell me, what time is it where you are, and from which corner of this little planet are you joining us tonight? Every time I read those comments, it feels like I can see Earth itself, a constellation of tiny lights from those who are still awake, quietly floating through the dark together. And if this journey brings you even a moment of calm, you're welcome to leave a small trace, a like, or a subscription, only if it feels right. Tiny gestures like that keep this small vessel adrift, carrying new souls who wander into the night, searching for something gentle to keep them company. Welcome back to the Sleepy Explorer, where we drift through the universe together, one quiet mystery at a time. Tonight, we begin our descent into the world beneath our feet. For most of history, humanity has tried to understand its place by looking upward. The stars were our compass, the moon our timekeeper, the sun our heartbeat. We learned to trust the sky because it was predictable, a moving tapestry that obeyed patterns we could read. But beneath our feet was something different. The ground did not shimmer or sing, it simply was. Solid, dependable. The one thing that seemed to hold still while everything else drifted through the heavens. We took comfort in that solidity. It told us we were safe. Yet even in the earliest myths, that comfort came with a question, a whisper that has followed us since the beginning. What lies below? When ancient civilizations told stories of creation, they often began with something buried an egg, a seed, a god asleep inside the earth. The Greeks spoke of Hades, not merely as a realm of the dead, but as a mirror to the living world above. The Norse told of Niflheim, a frozen domain wrapped in mist where the first rivers began. The Hindus described Patala, a radiant underworld of glowing stones and serpents made of light. And deep within Tibetan and Mongolian traditions, monks whispered about Shambhala, a hidden kingdom of peace, sealed away within the planet itself. In all these stories, the underground was not simply a place of punishment or fear. It was a place of continuation, a reflection of life, rather than its end. The ancients seemed to sense something modern minds often forget, that the earth, for all its silence, feels alive. It shifts, it breathes, it holds its own rhythm. To them, the ground was not dead matter but a vessel filled with mysteries, its interior as sacred as the stars. Even today, when we step into a cave, the old instinct stirs, the air changes, our voices echo in slow circles, the walls drip with time. Somewhere between fascination and unease, the body understands that we have crossed an invisible threshold, the boundary between the known and the unknown. Caves, tunnels, wells, they have always been portals in our imagination, doorways that ask whether the world might have layers of truth hidden beneath the surface. As centuries passed, we turned our curiosity upward. We built telescopes, mapped constellations, and sent our prayers into space. Yet the Earth remained the greater enigma. We could climb its mountains, cross its deserts, even drill into its crust, but we never reached its core. The deeper we tried to go, the more mysterious it became. And into that uncertainty, into that darkness, imagination found a home. The hollow earth theory, though born in the age of reason, grew from this ancient yearning. It wasn't a rebellion against science. It was an extension of wonder. The people who believed it weren't denying reality, they were expanding it. To them, the earth was not a cold sphere of stone. It was a layered being, filled with light and life, a living organism that held another world within itself. That idea might sound strange now, but in its own time, it made sense. The 17th century was a period when the earth was still half magic, half machine, a place that invited questions more than it offered answers. And one man, looking to the skies, would soon turn that same curiosity inward, toward the planet beneath him. His name was Edmund Halley, the same astronomer whose patient gaze traced the comet that still bears his name. In his lifetime, the heavens were not yet familiar. They were a puzzle waiting to be assembled. Halley spent his nights in silence, charting faint arcs of light across the dark, and his days trying to understand the invisible forces that guided both stars and compasses. It was there between the heavens and the earth that he noticed something unsettling. The magnetic field of the planet wavered, drifting unpredictably over years. Compasses refused to obey. The invisible lines of force that should have circled the globe like perfect threads seemed to twist and breathe, as though alive. At a time when science was still young, mystery was not the enemy, it was the beginning. Halley wondered if perhaps those shifting magnetic whispers came from inside the planet itself. He imagined Earth not as a single solid mass, but as a harmony of spheres, a hollow shell encasing smaller worlds within, each spinning at its own rhythm, each home to its own magnetic core. He pictured vast interior layers separated by thin skies and maybe even by auroras of their own, glowing gently in the dark. It was an extraordinary vision, part mathematics, part myth, and it came not from superstition, but from a scientist's refusal to accept that the unknown must stay silent. Halley proposed that these inner shells might even sustain life, warmed by the faint glow of an inner Sunday. The idea was not laughed at. In fact, some of his peers entertained it, at least briefly. After all, no one had ever seen the centre of the Earth. Seismology did not yet exist. What lay beneath the crust was pure speculation, a canvas painted by imagination. And imagination filled in the gaps beautifully. The hollow Earth became a poetic answer to an inconvenient question. Why does the planet's magnetic field shift and dance as if it were listening to multiple voices? To Halley, those voices were the layers of the Earth speaking to one another. Each world within the world had its own rhythm, its own pulse. In this picture, our planet was not static or cold, but alive, turning gently within itself, an organism made of orbiting shells. It was a thought both scientific and spiritual, a planet that breathed with unseen atmospheres and hidden horizons beneath its skin. Modern geology would one day prove the Earth solid at its heart, its core made of molten iron, its magnetism born from the convection of liquid metal. But Halley's idea left something behind that science couldn't disprove, a sense that even the ground we stand on might hold a secret deeper than measurement. When people heard about his theory, it sparked not ridicule but wonder. If the heavens could hold infinite stars, why couldn't the Earth hold hidden worlds? And so the hollow Earth theory began to move from lecture halls to taverns, from scholars to storytellers, slipping quietly into the bloodstream of culture. As decades turned to centuries, others would pick up where Halley left off. They refined, expanded, and romanticized the theory, turning it from a scientific curiosity into a myth reborn. By the early 19th century, one man in particular would give the hollow Earth its most enduring image, not as a metaphor, but as a destination. The next great believer in the world within the world was not an astronomer, but a soldier. John Cleves Sims Jr. had spent years in the quiet order of military life, where the Earth was something to march upon, not to question. Yet after his service, as he drifted into middle age, he became convinced that the planet beneath him was more than it appeared. In 1818, He sent a declaration to newspapers and universities across the United States, a simple letter that began, "I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within." It was a sentence that would both define and consume the rest of his life. Sims imagined the earth as a hollow shell about 800 miles thick, with two great openings at the poles. Through them, he said, one could sail into a temperate paradise bathed in eternal light, a world untouched by surface storms or human corruption. There, he believed, lived ancient civilizations, perhaps remnants of our own ancestors thriving in the warmth of an inner Sunday. It sounded outlandish, but Sims spoke with the steady certainty of a man describing something he had seen with his own eyes. He lectured across the country, carrying a globe with the top and bottom carefully carved away, his hands tracing invisible paths into the hollow. He argued that the Earth's interior was not only possible but inevitable, citing strange magnetic fluctuations, odd migrations of birds, and reports of warm winds near the Arctic. To most scientists it was nonsense, but to audiences listening by candlelight it was intoxicating. There was something deeply human in the way he described it, a yearning for undiscovered lands, for the possibility that mystery had not yet vanished from the world. Sims petitioned Congress to fund an expedition to the North Pole. He received polite refusals, mild applause, and quiet laughter. Still, he persisted. To him, this was not a pursuit of fame, but of truth. He believed humanity was on the edge of revelation, that within the next great voyage lay proof that the earth itself was layered with life. When he died, his dream unfulfilled, his followers marked his grave with a stone monument shaped like a globe open at both ends. It still stands today, quietly eroding in the Ohio air. And yet, the idea did not die with him. It lingered like an ember, glowing faintly through the decades. Others would pick it up, writers, mystics, explorers, each adding their own detail, their own shimmer of imagination. The hollow earth became a canvas onto which humanity painted its deepest longings, for refuge, for rediscovery, for the sense that the world still held corners untouched by light. In the centuries that followed, the theory would evolve, fracture, and take new forms, sometimes as pseudoscience, sometimes as myth, sometimes as metaphor. But beneath it all ran the same pulse, a quiet defiance against finality. Even in the age of data, there remains a hunger for the unknown, for the comfort that maybe, just maybe, we have not seen everything yet. Perhaps that is why these old ideas never fade completely. They remind us that the map of the world is also a map of our own imagination, that for every ocean we've crossed and every mountain we've climbed, there are still depths left unmeasured, both in the planet and in ourselves. And so, as this journey begins, we leave behind the bright certainties of the surface and listen for the echo that comes from below, because somewhere in that slow vibration, in the hush beneath the noise of the modern world, there's still a whisper from the ancient past, asking the same question it always has: what lies beneath us? Science likes to draw its boundaries in ink, sharp, confident, permanent. It tells us what can be measured, what can be proven, what deserves to be called real. But curiosity doesn't obey those borders. It seeps through them like light through a curtain. The moment we say, "This is all there is," the imagination answers softly, "Are you sure?" That tension between what we know and what we feel has shaped every story humanity has ever told. The hollow earth is one of those stories, suspended somewhere between observation and dream. Even the scientists who first proposed it weren't chasing fantasy. They were following data into mystery. They saw the numbers, the compasses, the strange magnetic shifts, and instead of closing the book, they asked for another page. And that's how discovery usually begins, not with certainty, but with doubt. Science and myth may seem like opposites, but they share the same heartbeat. Both start with a question whispered into the dark. The difference is what each does with the silence that follows. Science tries to fill it with answers. Myth learns to live inside it. Perhaps that's why stories like the Hollow Earth endure, not because people reject reason, but because they sense that reason alone can't hold the whole sky or the whole earth. There are corners of experience that refuse to fit inside formulas, feelings that resist the weight of proof. Somewhere between the equations and the legends lies a third space, the one where curiosity turns into meaning. It's tempting to think of curiosity as childish, a remnant of the age before reason, but in truth, it's what keeps reason alive. The first astronomers, philosophers, and explorers all stepped into the unknown, guided by something that felt more like wonder than logic. Even now, with satellites orbiting our planet and probes crossing the edge of the solar system, we still find ourselves drawn to questions that have no tidy answers. Why are we so unwilling to let go of mystery? Maybe because certainty, for all its comfort, is a kind of silence, and humans have never done well in silence. We are a species that listens for echoes from the heavens, from the depths, from one another. When knowledge ends, imagination takes over, not to deceive us, but to keep us company. So when people speak of the hollow earth, when they trace its imagined openings at the poles or draw its inner continents lit by hidden suns, they're not defying science. They're expressing a different kind of faith. Not in facts, but in possibility. The belief that there's always one more layer to uncover, one more truth waiting behind the next door. Science builds the map. Story fills in the blank spaces. And between them lies the terrain of wonder, a place we never quite outgrow. In the early centuries of modern science, the line between fact and fascination was far thinner than it is today. The word scientist itself didn't exist yet. Scholars were still called natural philosophers, observers of the world, whose work moved freely between mathematics, theology, and poetry. To them, the study of nature was not a contest between logic and faith, but a dialogue between both. The universe was vast, unmeasured, and beautifully strange. It was in this atmosphere that the hollow earth theory first took shape. Edmund Halley, who proposed it in 1692, wasn't a mystic or a novelist. He was one of the leading astronomers of his time, a Fellow of the Royal Society, and later, the Astronomer Royal of England. His papers on the magnetic field were published in scientific journals, not pamphlets. Yet when his data didn't match the predictions, he dared to ask whether the planet might be structured differently than anyone had imagined. By today's standards, his idea sounds fanciful, but at the time, it was simply a question drawn from observation. The Earth's magnetic field really did drift, and no one understood why. The instruments of the 17th century could not yet measure the molten outer core we now know generates that field. So Halley's theory that the planet contained several concentric shells, each rotating independently, was his attempt at logic, not fantasy. He even speculated that those inner spheres might have their own atmosphere and possibly sustain life, a suggestion that would later echo across centuries of speculation. His peers didn't call it madness. They called it intriguing. For a brief moment, the hollow earth stood as a legitimate hypothesis, a way to reconcile evidence with imagination. But as science refined its instruments, the story began to shift. By the late 18th century, Leonhard Euler, the Swiss mathematician, proposed a similar idea, though, in his version, the interior of the Earth contained a central Sunday. Euler's work was mostly mathematical, yet even he admitted that some parts of nature seemed to invite wonder as much as proof. Over time, the theory moved further from laboratories and into the realm of literature. Writers like Jules Verne, who published Journey to the Centre of the Earth in 1864, turned scientific speculation into narrative adventure. His book was not meant as prophecy, but it captured something that science itself had left behind, the thrill of mystery. In a single stroke, Verne transformed Halley's equations into imagery, glowing caverns, lost seas, prehistoric creatures frozen beneath the crust. The theory became a dream, and yet that dream carried traces of truth. It preserved the human desire that began with Halley's question: what if there is more beneath what we can see? The hollow earth outgrew the journals that once debated it and became part of culture's shared imagination, a bridge between disciplines, connecting the rigor of inquiry with the poetry of wonder. Perhaps that's why we still talk about it today. It's not the science that lasts. It's the courage to imagine science differently, to let the unknown remain beautiful for a little while longer. It's easy to imagine science and story as two different languages, one spoken in numbers, the other in dreams. But if you listen closely, they share the same rhythm. Both begin with wonder. Both begin with the courage to say, "I don't know." When we look back at the centuries that shaped modern thought, we find that almost every great discovery began as what seemed like fiction. The idea that invisible forces could attract objects across empty space was once dismissed as absurd until Newton gave it a name. The belief that the Earth itself might be in motion, spinning through darkness, was called heresy until Copernicus proved it was simply the truth seen from another angle. Each revelation began as a story no one dared to believe. That's what makes the history of the hollow Earth so strangely human. It sits at the intersection of two instincts, our hunger for knowledge and our refusal to let mystery die. Even when evidence eventually closed the book on Halley's nested spheres and Sims's polar gateways, the story continued, carried not by data but by desire. Because curiosity is not obedient. It doesn't stop where facts end. It wanders. It asks what else might be true, what else might exist beyond the reach of proof. And perhaps that's why, in an age overflowing with answers, people still find comfort in questions that have none. Science thrives on precision, but imagination reminds us why precision matters. Without wonder, knowledge becomes machinery accurate but hollow. The two need each other. Science expands our understanding of the world. Story deepens our experience of it. The first tells us what the Earth is, the second tells us what it means. And somewhere between those two lies the territory we inhabit every day, a world that's both measurable and mysterious. We can chart its crust with satellites, trace its magnetic field with equations, even model its core on computer screens. But none of that cancels the deeper truth, that beneath all our instruments there remains a hum, a quiet reminder that the planet we call home is still alive in ways we don't entirely understand. That hum, the pull of curiosity, is what keeps us moving. It's the reason telescopes point outward while shovels dig inward. It's why a story like the hollow Earth can persist for centuries without evidence. Not because we believe it, but because we want to believe that there's always more to see. And maybe that's not superstition at all. Maybe it's the most scientific impulse we have to admit, that we haven't reached the bottom of knowing. So before we travel deeper into this idea, into the myths, the maps, and the explorers who swore they found entrances to another world, it's worth pausing here, in this quiet middle ground, between proof and possibility, between the surface and whatever lies below it. The earth beneath us may not be hollow, but the questions it stirs most certainly are wide, resonant, and echoing far into the dark. Before the world became a globe, it was a stage. At least, that's how it must have felt. The horizon was a straight line, the sky a dome overhead, and everything from the flight of birds to the fall of rain seemed to move within a single flat enclosure. For early civilizations, this wasn't ignorance. It was observation. The earth looked flat, and for a long time, that was enough. The sailors of ancient Mesopotamia believed the ocean's edge curved up into a great wall of water that held the heavens in place. The Egyptians imagined the earth as a wide plate supported by the arms of gods. In China, it was thought to be a square landmass under a round sky. Even the Greeks, brilliant observers though they were, began with a vision of the earth as a flat disk floating in an endless sea. Only later, as shadows curved on sundials and ships disappeared hull first over the horizon, did a few philosophers begin to suspect that the world might not be what it seemed. There's something deeply human about that. We build our sense of reality from what our eyes can see and what our feet can touch. When knowledge is limited, intuition takes the lead. To the people who lived thousands of years ago, The idea of a round Earth was far stranger than a flat one. After all, they had never seen the whole planet, only the small circle of land they called home. In a way, those ancient worldviews were not mistakes, but mirrors and reflections of how humans interpret the unknown. The flat Earth was a story told by eyes that hadn't yet learned to look beyond the horizon. It was the best model we could make with the evidence we had, and when better tools came along, mathematics, telescopes, voyages, with the story evolved. The world didn't suddenly change shape, we did. It's comforting to think that progress moves only forward, that once we've corrected an old belief we'll never fall for another illusion again. But perhaps that's too simple. For every horizon we've managed to see past, there's another we still can't. The surface of the Earth is no longer a mystery, but what lies beneath it still is. So maybe the question isn't whether people were wrong to see the Earth as flat, but whether we're still doing something similar, just in a different direction. If ancient eyes misread the surface, could modern minds be misreading the depths? If our ancestors once mistook flatness for truth, might we one day discover that solidity itself was only another illusion, that what seems solid could, in its own way, be hollow? Science has taught us that perception is a slippery thing. Even now, astronauts describe looking back at Earth from orbit as seeing something both familiar and unreal, a fragile blue marble glowing against black infinity. Perhaps that's the paradox. The closer we get to understanding the planet's shape, the less we feel we've understood its nature. The ancient maps may have been wrong, but their heart was right. They reminded us that the world is larger than what we can see. And somewhere between the flat horizons of the past and the hollow theories of today lies the same instinct that's always guided us: the need to turn mystery into meaning. When humanity finally learned that the Earth was round, it didn't happen overnight. The truth arrived quietly, like dawn bleeding into darkness, not a single revelation, but a slow reshaping of the mind. Sailors began to notice ships vanishing below the horizon rather than shrinking into the distance. The Greek philosopher Eratosthenes measured shadows cast by the sun at different cities and, from their angles, calculated the planet's circumference with remarkable accuracy. And centuries later, explorers like Magellan would circle the globe, proving not only that the world was curved, but that it was connected, one unbroken sphere, adrift in the vast ocean of space. The myth of a flat Earth faded, but it didn't vanish completely. Even now, a few voices still insist that what we see with our eyes must outweigh what we learn through instruments. Yet their argument, in its essence, isn't so different from what drives many of us: the desire for certainty in a world that keeps shifting beneath our feet. The flat Earth was never just a belief about geography. It was a reflection of trust in sight, in self, in the immediate over the abstract. Centuries later, when the idea of a hollow Earth began to surface, it came from a similar place, not from ignorance, but from longing. Longing for more space to explore, for a world that still held secrets under its skin. In both ideas, the flat and the hollow, there is a kind of romance, a refusal to accept that the map is finished. The difference lies in direction. One belief clings to the surface, the other digs into the depths. The first looks outward and says, "What if there's more land beyond the edge?" The second looks inward and asks, "What if there's more world beneath the crust?" Both are questions born from the same pulse, the unwillingness to believe that reality has already been fully drawn. By the 19th century, the age of exploration had mapped nearly every visible coastline. The blank spaces on maps, those pale regions labelled terra incognita, were disappearing. Yet, instead of satisfying curiosity, the act of mapping seemed to provoke it further. When there were no more edges left to reach, imagination turned inward. The Earth, once a mystery from the outside, became a mystery from within. The hollow Earth theory thrived in that transition. It inherited the same hunger that once drove sailors beyond the horizon, the dream that discovery might still be possible. The poles, remote and unreachable, became the new edges of the world. In lecture halls and novels, people began to imagine vast openings there, gateways not to other continents but to other realms. And in a strange way, this shift wasn't regression, it was evolution. The mind simply found a new direction for its wonder. It's easy to look back and smile at the people who believed in edges or entrances, but if you listen closely, their voices don't sound foolish. They sound familiar. They're asking the same questions we still ask today, only in a different language. Because even now, when the Earth's shape has long been proven and its orbit precisely mapped, we continue to search for something beyond the visible, maybe not through geography, but through meaning. What is the world made of? Where does it begin and end? What lies beneath the surface of things, not just the planet, but ourselves? In every era, new knowledge replaces old maps, but the heart keeps sketching new ones, and sometimes those new maps point not outward, but inward. It's easy to think that myths like the flat Earth or the hollow Earth survive only on the fringes, relics of misunderstanding, swept aside by centuries of evidence. But their persistence tells a different story. They endure not because people have forgotten the facts, but because the facts alone rarely satisfy the soul. Knowledge explains the what, but not always the why, and somewhere between those two, wonder finds room to grow. When the first photographs of Earth arrived from space, that blue sphere floating in darkness, they should have ended the debate forever. Instead, something curious happened. Many who saw those images for the first time didn't feel closure, they felt awe. The sight of our planet hanging like a fragile ornament in the void didn't erase mystery, it deepened it. The picture confirmed what science had long said, yet it also stirred an ancient feeling that perhaps the truth, while correct, was not complete. That feeling, the quiet ache behind curiosity, might be what keeps old ideas alive. The flat Earth appeals to those who long for simplicity, a world with edges, where everything can be drawn, defined, and known. The hollow Earth speaks to the opposite desire, the wish that there's still more to discover, that the world we walk on hasn't revealed all its secrets yet. Both in their own way offer comfort, one in boundaries, the other in depth. And perhaps that's why these stories refuse to fade. They are less about the planet itself than about us, about how we handle the unknown. The universe, vast and indifferent, keeps expanding, while the Earth, once the center of everything, has become a small rock among billions. Faced with that scale, it's only natural to want to believe that our home still hides something grand beneath its surface, a secret that belongs to us alone. Skeptics may laugh, but even they share the same longing. Science and story are not rivals. They are twin instincts in the same species, one reaching for the stars, the other reaching inward for meaning, and as history has shown, the two often meet in unexpected places. Galileo's telescope and Verne's imagination were both acts of faith, faith that reality was bigger than what we could see. The irony is that the more completely we map the world, the more space imagination seems to reclaim. The internet has replaced the blank corners of old maps, yet those digital frontiers now fill with new legends, hollow worlds, parallel dimensions, cosmic gateways. Technology didn't kill mystery, it multiplied it. Perhaps it has always been that way. Humans do not live by facts alone. We live by the stories that make those facts feel alive. A map without mystery is just a surface. A theory without wonder is just a diagram. What gives them weight? What gives us weight is the hollow space in between, the echo that asks, what if? So, maybe the title of this section means more than it seems. The flat Earth was about horizons, the hollow Earth about depths. But the real hollowness, the real emptiness, has always been inside us. The quiet space that curiosity keeps open, waiting to be filled by something new. And that emptiness is not a flaw. It's an invitation. Because every time we try to close the world with certainty, it's that same hollow heart that whispers, not yet, there's still more to see. Long before the word hollow earth existed, humanity already imagined one. The idea wasn't written in equations or maps, it was carved into myth. When people looked upward, they saw the heavens. When they looked downward, they saw memory. The underworld was never simply a prison for the dead. It was a mirror of the sky, a place where light went to sleep and truth changed its shape. In ancient Greece, the poet Hesiod spoke of Hades, a shadowed realm ruled by the unseen brother of Zeus. It wasn't a fiery hell, but a quiet kingdom beneath the surface, filled with echoes of the living world above. The dead weren't tortured there. They simply continued, drifting in a twilight that mirrored life without its light. The Greeks believed the soul had to travel downward through rivers like Styx and Acheron to reach that inner landscape. In a way, they were the first to imagine a world within the world, one that existed not in the heavens but beneath the weight of stone. Far to the north, in the cold imagination of the Norse, the same idea took root in a different form. They called it Niflheim, the world of mist. It lay beneath the roots of the cosmic tree Yggdrasil, where frost and silence reigned. There, the goddess Hel ruled over those who died ordinary deaths, neither heroic nor damned. It was not punishment, but stillness, a final winter where all motion ceased. Even in that icy stillness, though, there was structure, rivers, mountains, gates. To the Norse mind, the underworld was not chaos, it was another order, hidden from sunlight. In India, the sages of the Puranas described something different, not a place of darkness, but of radiance. They called it Patala. According to Hindu cosmology, the universe contained 7 upper realms and 7 lower ones, each inhabited by beings suited to their world. Patala, the lowest of them, was said to shimmer with jewels and be ruled by wise serpent beings known as Nagas. These weren't demons but guardians of secret knowledge, beings who lived far beneath the surface in cities of light. For many, Patala symbolized inner wisdom, the depth of consciousness itself. Centuries later, Buddhist and Tibetan traditions spoke of Shambhala, sometimes physical, sometimes spiritual, a hidden kingdom said to lie beneath or within the Himalayas. It was a place of peace and enlightenment, invisible to greed and war. Only the pure of heart could find it, and even then, not by digging but by awakening. The legend spread westward through explorers and mystics, eventually merging with another idea. Agartha, a vast subterranean realm said to shelter an ancient civilization that watches over the surface world. Across continents and centuries, the names changed, but the shape remained the same. Beneath every known world lay another not empty, but inhabited, not cursed, but sacred. The Greeks placed it under rivers, the Norse under roots, the Hindus under consciousness, the Buddhists under compassion. Each culture looked downward and saw not despair, but meaning. And maybe that's the most striking thing. Humanity's oldest stories didn't put paradise in the sky, they placed it underground. The heavens were distant and divine, but the depths were intimate, reachable. To descend was not always to fall. Sometimes it was to return. When you place all these myths side by side, Hades, Niflheim, Patala, Shambhala, Agartha, the similarities begin to hum like a buried chord. Across languages, continents, and millennia, humanity kept pointing downward and saying the same thing. There is more beneath us. In the West, that more often carried the weight of mortality. The underworld was a place where the soul went after death, not to be punished necessarily, but to continue. The Greeks imagined it as an echo of the living world, the Norse as a frozen archive of lives that had ended. To descend meant to lose the body, but not existence itself. The dead didn't vanish. They simply moved to another layer of being. In the East, however, the direction of descent often meant something else, not death, but depth. In Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, the realms below weren't always darker or lesser. Sometimes they were wiser. Patala shimmered with light. Shambhala radiated peace. These were not places one was banished to, they were places one had to earn the right to enter. The Western imagination placed paradise above and mystery below. The Eastern one often fused the two, suggesting that enlightenment was not found by escaping the earth but by understanding it. It's fascinating to see how these different visions mirrored their landscapes. Civilizations surrounded by mountains and caves, Greece, Tibet, India, saw the ground not as an obstacle but as a threshold. To enter the earth was to step into the sacred. Meanwhile, cultures that lived under open skies or icy tundra saw the depths as distance, a frontier of memory and shadow. Yet whether frozen or illuminated, the world below always had a purpose, to hold what could not survive on the surface. In every myth, the underground becomes a keeper of what is lost souls, lost wisdom, lost time. The Greeks buried the dead so they could return to the soil. The Norse imagined their gods' roots sinking into hidden realms. The Hindus believed that beneath every act of creation was a layer of stillness, where the universe rested before it began again. Even in the Buddhist legends of Shambhala, the world below is not static. It waits, it watches, it prepares for renewal. Perhaps that's why the underworld has always felt more human than the heavens. The sky belongs to God's infinite, flawless, untouchable. But the earth is intimate. It's where we are born, where we walk, where we are buried. Its depths feel reachable, familiar, and in that familiarity lies both fear and comfort. To descend is to face what we've hidden, to meet the silence that mirrors our own. When modern readers look back on these myths, they often see them as metaphors for psychology or spirituality. But in their own time, these weren't just stories, they were maps of existence. People didn't think of the underworld as an idea. They believed it was there, just beyond reach, layered beneath rivers, mountains, and deserts. In that sense, every myth was an early model of the planet itself, not geological, but emotional. And when centuries later, scientists began speaking of magnetic anomalies, polar openings, and hollow spheres, those ideas didn't fall from nowhere. They sprouted from the soil of these older dreams, the ancient belief that the world had an interior life, that beneath its crust, something vast and sacred still moved. By the time modern science began to map the layers of the earth, the ancient stories had already drawn their own invisible blueprint. They left behind an emotional geology, a belief that depth itself holds meaning. And when the Enlightenment era came, with its telescopes and equations, people didn't abandon that idea. They simply translated it into a new language. To the thinkers of the 17th and 18th centuries, the underworld was no longer the domain of gods and spirits. It became a question of physics and geometry. If ancient myths had described realms beneath the surface, perhaps there was truth hidden within their symbols. When Edmund Halley proposed his hollow shell model of the planet, he was unknowingly giving mathematical form to something humanity had been imagining for millennia. His Earth, filled with inner atmospheres and auroras, wasn't so different from Patala's luminous caverns or Shambhala's radiant halls. He had taken myth and placed it under the lens of reason, but the shape remained the same. 2 centuries later, that fusion of myth and science would take on a life of its own. Explorers spoke of polar openings, echoing the ancient rivers and gateways that once marked the path to Hades. Mystics claimed to receive messages from beings inside the planet, echoes of the Nagas, and bodhisattvas said to dwell in hidden sanctuaries below. Even the modern legends of Agartha, a vast subterranean civilization guiding humanity's fate, trace their roots back to these older cosmologies, only dressed now in the vocabulary of pseudoscience and speculation. The transition from myth to theory was never a clean break. It was more like a slow sedimentation, each generation layering its own version of the same desire, to believe that the earth is more than a machine of rock and fire. Beneath every calculation and expedition lay the same question the ancients once asked at the mouths of their caves. What waits below? Across time, the image of the underworld has shifted from spiritual to scientific, from religious to romantic, but its emotional gravity has never changed. The Greeks sent their souls downward seeking judgment. The Hindus sent their sages seeking knowledge. The modern dreamers send their instruments, drills, probes, satellites, all searching for the same thing. Proof that the world still contains mystery. If we strip away the language of faith and science alike, what remains is the same human impulse, the longing for depth in a flat, explained universe. When we can no longer climb higher into heaven, we start to dig, not because we expect to find gods or monsters, but because we want to feel that the story isn't over. Maybe that's why the phrase hollow earth resonates even now. It sounds absurd, yet strangely comforting, a promise that somewhere, hidden under the ordinary, there is another layer of reality waiting to be uncovered. To imagine that the sky once fell underground is to admit that even the most ancient dreams can find new shapes, new meanings. The underworlds of myth have become metaphors, but their pulse still beats inside the modern imagination. Whether we call it Hades or Agartha, the name doesn't matter. What matters is that the idea has survived every shift in belief, every new boundary of science, every age that tried to close the story of wonder. Because in the end, the world beneath is not just beneath us. It's within us, a hollow, carved by curiosity, a depth we keep filling with questions. By the late 17th century, the universe was finally beginning to take shape, or so it seemed. Telescopes had revealed moons orbiting Jupiter, comets arcing through blackness, and a sun that ruled over a clockwork sky. For the first time in history, the heavens were measurable. But the earth beneath those measurements was still a mystery. No one knew what lay under its surface, how deep its crust went, or what caused its invisible magnetic pull. Into that uncertainty stepped Edmund Halley, one of England's most respected astronomers. In 1692, he presented a paper to the Royal Society with a question that few had dared to ask. What if the planet itself were layered like the heavens, not solid, but hollow, with worlds within worlds? Halley was no mystic. He had mapped the southern stars, tracked the orbits of planets, and helped calculate the path of the comet that now bears his name. But as he studied the Earth's magnetic field, he noticed something troubling. The data refused to align. Compass readings from different parts of the world varied in ways that couldn't be explained by any single solid sphere. The magnetic poles seemed to drift over time, as though multiple sources were tugging at them from within. At the dawn of modern physics, this was not a trivial puzzle. Gravity had only just been defined. Electricity and magnetism were still invisible languages waiting to be decoded. To Halley, the drifting compass needles hinted at a deeper architecture, one the instruments of his era couldn't yet reach. And so he proposed a radical but elegant idea. Perhaps the Earth consisted of several concentric shells, each rotating at its own speed, separated by thin layers of atmosphere. Inside these shells, he speculated, there might be light, a faint inner glow, like the auroras that shimmered near the poles. Those mysterious lights, he suggested, could even escape through cracks in the crust, dancing across the night sky as the northern lights we see today. It was a hypothesis built not on fantasy but on observation. In an age before seismographs, before geological models or electromagnetic theory, Halley's imagination filled the gaps that instruments could not. He wasn't rejecting science, he was extending it, reaching beyond its limits with the only tool left: wonder. Many of his contemporaries found the idea curious but not absurd. The Royal Society discussed it without ridicule. To them, it was simply one of many attempts to explain the unexplainable. In a world still learning to measure its own weight, nothing was off the table yet. Halley's hollow earth was a mathematical speculation, not a myth. Centuries later, when the theory would reappear wrapped in mysticism and conspiracy, people would forget that it began in the hands of a scientist, one who believed, sincerely, that the Earth was a complex living system, made not of empty space but of harmony. In 1692, there were no satellites, no global magnetic surveys, no concept of molten cores or tectonic plates. The planet's interior was as mysterious then as the edges of the cosmos had once been to Galileo. Halley simply shifted the telescope downward. And for a moment, it worked. The world suddenly seemed larger, deeper, not less real, but more alive. To understand why Halley imagined a hollow Earth, you have to return to a time when even gravity was still new. Newton's Principia had been published only 5 years earlier. The laws that governed the heavens were freshly inked on paper, and no one yet knew whether they applied perfectly to the world below. The Earth's interior, meanwhile, was pure speculation, a darkness no one had ever pierced. Halley's curiosity began with the compass. Sailors relied on it the way stargazers relied on constellations as a quiet instrument of faith, but their reports were inconsistent. The magnetic north seemed to drift unpredictably over decades, as if some unseen machinery inside the Earth were turning at its own rhythm. For Halley, that inconsistency was not a flaw in the compass, it was a clue. He proposed that the planet's magnetism might not come from one source, but from several. If the Earth contained multiple shells, each rotating slightly differently, their movements could produce a shifting magnetic field, a cosmic orchestra playing beneath our feet. In his model, each inner sphere carried its own polarity, its own balance of north and south. The small variations sailors observed were simply the music of those hidden rotations. This wasn't the reasoning of a dreamer, it was the reasoning of a scientist who refused to ignore the gaps in his data. When Halley looked at the auroras flickering above the Arctic, he saw not divine fire but possible evidence of those same inner spaces, gases escaping through polar vents, illuminated by electrical light. He imagined the Earth as a kind of breathing body, exhaling its secret air into the night sky. Modern geology, of course, would later prove him wrong. The magnetism comes from molten iron moving deep in the outer core, not from rotating shells. But in 1692 no one could have known that. Halley was reasoning from what was visible, the drift of needles, the shimmer of lights, the tremors of earthquakes, and building bridges toward what was invisible. In that sense, his mistake was not foolishness. It was the kind of beautiful error that drives science forward. Even Newton, his friend and occasional rival, did not dismiss him. The two exchanged letters about the planet's structure, and though Newton doubted the hollowness, he admitted that the mechanics of magnetism were still a mystery. The world was full of questions, and Halley's proposal was just one more way of asking them. There's a quiet grace in that the image of a man standing in candlelight, drawing circles upon circles, trying to reconcile what he could see with what he could only feel. He had no drills, no satellites, not even a clear understanding of pressure or density. Yet he dared to imagine an Earth that was not static but alive, layered like a nesting doll of motion and air. Today, when we speak of him, we remember the comet that bears his name, a traveller that returns every 76 years, faithful as memory. But perhaps Halley's true legacy lies here, in this half-forgotten theory, a vision of the Earth not as a lump of rock, but as a living system of nested worlds, turning quietly in the dark. Halley's paper might have faded quietly into the archives of the Royal Society, if not for the strange persistence of beautiful ideas. Even after his death, the thought of concentric worlds refused to die. It drifted from scholar to scholar like a faint signal, improbable, but irresistible. In the decades that followed, mathematicians and philosophers revisited his diagrams. Leonhard Euler, one of the greatest minds of the 18th century, briefly considered a similar model, an Earth that was not solid but hollow, illuminated by a small inner Sunday. To him, it was less a fantasy than a question of symmetry, a curiosity about how nature might mirror itself inwardly as well as outwardly. Others, inspired less by mathematics and more by mystery, began to imagine what might dwell inside such a world. If the outer shell could support life, why not the inner? Could civilizations thrive there, unseen but parallel to our own? In that question lay the seed of a new mythology, one that would grow through the centuries, blending science, literature, and longing into a single luminous thread. By the time the 19th century arrived, Halley's model had been largely replaced by newer geological theories. Yet his spirit, the courage to imagine structure where data was silent, lived on. Writers like Jules Verne, in his Journey to the Center of the Earth, transformed the concept into adventure. Mystics reinterpreted it as revelation, and explorers like John Cleave Sims turned it into a mission, claiming that great openings existed at the poles, leading to another realm below. Each of these successors carried a fragment of Halley's vision, though they rarely credited him directly. They inherited not his equations, but his audacity, the belief that the unknown was not something to fear, but to follow. It's easy, with modern instruments and seismic charts, to look back and smile. We now know that the planet's core burns hotter than the surface of the sun, that no atmosphere or inner glow could survive in such pressure. But to dismiss Halley entirely would be to miss the point. His theory wasn't about being right. It was about refusing to stop at what was known. He lived in an age when science was half poetry, and perhaps that's what made it so alive. To Halley, the universe was not a closed system of facts, but an unfolding conversation between gravity and grace, between curiosity and faith. When he imagined Earth as a series of nested spheres, he wasn't picturing emptiness. He was picturing harmony, worlds within worlds, each turning in quiet correspondence with the others. And maybe that's why his vision still lingers, because beneath the equations and the errors lies something timeless, the human desire to believe that even in a world we've already mapped, there are still depths left to explore. Halley never found those hidden worlds, but he did something just as rare. He reminded us that science, at its best, is not the opposite of wonder, it is its continuation. In the spring of 1818, a small pamphlet began to circulate across the young United States. It carried no illustrations, only a single bold declaration. I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles, 12 or 16 degrees wide. I pledge my life in support of this truth, and am ready to explore the hollow, if the world will support and aid me in the undertaking. The signature at the bottom belonged to John Cleave Sims, a retired U.S. Army officer turned self-taught theorist. To his peers, the statement sounded outrageous. To the public, it sounded like adventure. Sims had read about Edmund Halley's nested Earths and found them too static, too lifeless. If the planet truly contained inner worlds, he reasoned, then surely there must be a way to enter them. He imagined the Earth not as a sealed sphere, but as a kind of cosmic fruit open at both ends, with the poles serving as gateways into the vast interior. He believed those openings were thousands of miles wide, large enough for ships or, someday, aircraft, to pass through into a hidden land bathed in perpetual light. He called them the holes at the ends of the earth. In Sims's vision, the world inside was not dark or dead. It was warm, fertile, alive, lit by a soft central sun that never set. He imagined forests and rivers curving upward along the inner shell, inhabited by unknown species and perhaps even lost civilizations. In his letters, he described a landscape where night never fell, where birds could migrate through the polar openings and never return, where explorers might sail into the earth itself and emerge on the other side. It's tempting to smile at the audacity of it, but remember the time he lived in. The early 19th century was an age of discovery, when explorers were still vanishing into the Arctic, chasing the Northwest Passage and the promise of glory. Maps were full of blank spaces, and mystery was currency. If Halley had been the mathematician of the hollow earth, Sims became its evangelist. He gave lectures across the country, sending circular letters to Congress, universities and newspapers, pleading for an expedition to the poles. He promised to find new continents, new races of men, and perhaps a new Eden. Crowds came not for the evidence, but for the wonder of it, the dream that even in a world increasingly charted and measured, there were still unseen realms waiting at the edges of the sky. No government ever funded his expedition, yet his passion proved contagious. Others began to repeat his claim, to sketch maps showing gaping entrances at the top and bottom of the globe. Artists drew cross-sections of the planet with inner seas, inner suns, and cities tucked under the crust. Science might have doubted him, but the imagination didn't. And so, in lecture halls and taverns, around campfires and printing presses, the idea took on a life of its own, not as a theory, but as a vision. If you close your eyes, you can almost see what Sims saw: a ship or an airship gliding toward the Arctic horizon. The air grows warmer, not colder. The compass spins, uncertain. And then, ahead, the clouds open, revealing a dawn rising not from the east but from below. For a brief moment, the world folds inward, and day breaks from within the earth. In an age when steamships were shrinking oceans and telegraphs were stitching continents together, Sims's proposal arrived like a whisper from an older world, one where maps still held their breath. He sent copies of his circular to universities, scientific societies, even to Congress itself, declaring that the ends of the earth are open. Most recipients dismissed it as eccentric, but others, journalists, poets, preachers, found something in it that science alone couldn't give: the thrill of mystery. The United States was still young then, and exploration was part of its identity. The idea that the planet might hold hidden continents beneath the poles resonated with a culture built on frontiers. If there were lands beyond the seas, why not beneath them? For every skeptic with a microscope, there were a dozen dreamers with a map. Sims began touring lecture halls, carrying a wooden globe he had cut open to reveal its hollow interior. He would point to the polar rims and declare, with the conviction of a prophet, that ships could sail into them just as surely as they crossed the equator. The newspapers mocked him, but the audiences kept coming. Some came to laugh, some came to believe. Most came because they wanted, just for an evening, to feel that the world was still capable of surprise. His words carried a strange magnetism, part scientific, part spiritual. The Enlightenment had taught people to trust reason, but the Romantic movement was teaching them to trust wonder. Sims stood at the crossroads of both, a man with one foot in fact, and the other in faith. He wrote that the interior world would not only expand human knowledge, but also human destiny, that perhaps the inhabitants inside were older, wiser brothers, watching over us from below. The story spread quickly through pamphlets and newspapers. Publishers illustrated his ideas with cross-sections of the earth, vast circular openings at each pole, glowing with the light of an inner Sunday. Some artists drew explorers in small ships sailing down into the sky. Others depicted the aurora borealis as the breath of that hidden world escaping into our own. It wasn't proof that made the idea travel, it was hope. The 19th century was full of endings, the age of discovery winding down, the blank spaces on maps being filled in, the mysteries of the natural world increasingly catalogued and explained. Sims's hollow earth offered a kind of defiance, a promise that not everything had been found, that wonder still had somewhere to hide. And perhaps that's why his theory spread more through imagination than through academia. It appeared in sermons, in novels, in the letters of travellers. One missionary wrote that if Sims were right, then even hell itself might be a place of light. Others compared his polar openings to biblical portals, entrances to Eden, or to the underworld reborn. Science might not have believed him, but the public didn't need belief, only beauty. And in that sense, Sims succeeded. His idea became less a claim than a canvas. On it, others would begin to paint their own visions of the world within. Explorers, writers, mystics, and eventually, the curious children of the modern age who would still look at the poles and wonder what lies beyond the ice. For a man who never left home, John Cleave Sims managed to make the world feel unexplored again. John Cleave Sims never reached the poles. He never built the expedition he dreamed of, never stood on the rim of the earth to peer inside. He died in 1829, still convinced that somewhere, near the top and bottom of the world, two vast gateways waited to be found. But ideas have their own kind of endurance, and his outlived him. After his death, his followers kept the torch alive. His son, Americus Simes, continued to publish his father's writings, insisting that the truth of the polar openings shall one day shine upon the world. A few years later, a young writer and explorer named Jeremiah Reynolds took up the cause, travelling the country with lectures about a hollow planet. Reynolds's passion was so persuasive that in 1838, the government finally launched an official naval expedition to the South Pole, not to find Simes's openings, officially, but inspired by the same spirit of discovery he had kindled. The expedition never found a hole in the world. What it did find were the cold coasts of Antarctica, a continent no one had confirmed before. In a strange twist of fate, the dream of an inner Earth helped reveal the shape of the outer one. By then, Simes had become more legend than man. Newspapers called him the mad philosopher of the poles. Novelists turned his theories into fiction. Poets wrote of the sunlight beneath the ice. And in the imagination of the public, the hollow earth had shifted once more from a theory of geography to a metaphor of hope. Because at its core, Simes's vision was never just about the planet. It was about persistence, about refusing to accept that exploration had ended, about believing that the map of knowledge still had secret folds left to open. There's something haunting in that the image of an aging man, pacing before a crowd, holding a hollow globe and pointing toward the unseen. His arguments may have been flawed, his evidence thin, but his conviction was luminous. He spoke of warmth beneath the ice, of dawn rising from darkness, of a sun that shone from within the earth itself. And maybe that's why his story still feels alive, not because anyone still expects to find an opening at the poles, but because deep down we still want there to be one. We want the world to hold a secret that isn't ours, yet a place that reminds us that the unknown is not gone, only hidden. Simes's holes may never have existed, but his light remains. It burns quietly in every question that begins with what if. So, if you ever find yourself looking north, where the aurora dances like fire through frozen air, imagine just for a moment that it's not sunlight reflected, but sunlight remembered. The echo of a promise still glowing from within the earth, waiting to be found. When science let go of the hollow earth, art quietly reached out to catch it. The idea that had once lived in the halls of the Royal Society began to wander into the pages of novels and poems, where it found something rarer than evidence permanence. In 1838, Edgar Allan Poe published The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, a strange and haunting tale of a voyage toward the South Pole. Its final chapters dissolve into feverish mystery, ice melting into fog, birds flying upward into the unknown, and finally a white figure rising from the depths, enormous and silent. Poe never explained what it was. He left it unfinished, like a dream cut off by waking. Some readers thought it a vision of death. Others thought it a glimpse into another world, the world beneath. A generation later, Jules Verne gave the hollow earth its most enduring form. His Journey to the Centre of the Earth, published in 1864, followed Professor Liedenbrock and his nephew Axel as they descended through volcanic tunnels into a hidden realm where oceans rippled beneath crystal ceilings and prehistoric creatures roamed under a dim inner Sunday. It was not meant as science. It was something gentler, more human, a love letter to curiosity itself. Verne's hollow world was not a claim to truth, but a celebration of our desire for it. The book became a sensation. Readers marvelled not because they believed, but because they wanted to believe. Verne had taken Halley's equations and Simes's declarations and turned them into a heartbeat, a place where the impossible could still feel inevitable. He made the centre of the earth into a mirror of the human mind, dark, dangerous and full of wonder. And so, the hollow earth began to drift away from science and into story. By the late 19th century, it appeared everywhere in Edward Bulwer Lytton's The Coming Race, where an advanced civilization lives beneath the surface, powered by a mysterious energy called vril. In William R. Bradshaw's The Goddess of Atva Tabar, where inner worlds shimmer with strange technologies and spiritual perfection. Each author took the same premise and reshaped it to reflect the dreams of their age. For the Victorians, the underground was not a myth to prove or disprove, it was a metaphor. It represented the unseen layers of civilization, the subconscious before psychology had a name, the idea that beneath the polished surface of progress, something ancient still stirred. And in that sense, the Hollow Earth stopped being a place and became a feeling, a story that belonged less to geology and more to the geography of the soul. The scientists had tried to measure it, the poets simply entered it. As the 19th century dimmed into the 20th, the Hollow Earth slipped further from lecture halls and deeper into imagination. Science had moved on. Seismographs now hummed with the proof of a solid core, and the magnetism that once puzzled Halley had found its explanation in molten iron. Yet the story refused to die. It simply changed its disguise. In the hands of mystics and dreamers, the Hollow Earth became less a theory and more a sanctuary. The Theosophical Society, founded by Helena Blavatsky in the late 1800s, wove the idea into its vision of hidden masters, enlightened beings who guided humanity from a subterranean city called Agartha. To believers, the world within was not a geological structure, but a spiritual one, a place of purity untouched by the surface's wars and greed. Soon, pulp magazines and early science fiction writers picked up the thread. In their pages, explorers fell through Antarctic chasms into inner worlds where dinosaurs still breathed, or where lost civilizations had built golden cities lit by perpetual suns. Authors like Edgar Rice Burroughs in his Pellucidar series filled those spaces with adventure and awe, and millions of readers followed. For a public reeling from industrialization, from the roar of new machines and the fading of wilderness, the idea of a secret, untouched realm inside the earth felt like medicine. That's what art can do. It doesn't need to prove, it only needs to resonate. Where science closes a door with certainty, story opens it again with possibility. The Hollow Earth was no longer about geology, it was about longing. It was about... The timing was uncanny, as if literature and science were uncovering the same truth from opposite sides, that the greatest unknowns lie within. And so the Hollow Earth became a mirror not of the planet, but of us. Every story that descended beneath the crust was, in its own way, a descent into the human condition. Verne's explorers dug through stone to reach wonder. Poe's sailors drifted into white oblivion. Burroughs's heroes battled monsters that might as well have been memories. It no longer mattered whether there was an entrance at the poles. The real entrance had always been inward. And maybe that's why the idea survived every correction, every textbook, every map that said otherwise. Science explains the world, but art makes it feel alive. There comes a point when a myth outlives its meaning and becomes something else. Not a belief, but a reflection. The Hollow Earth had passed that threshold long ago. It no longer needed to be proven, only to be felt. In the quiet between fact and fiction, it became a mirror for everything humanity longed for. Hidden purity, eternal light, untouched beginnings. Each generation saw something different inside its depths. For the Romantics, it was the realm of lost innocence. For the Victorians, it was the echo of faith in an age of machinery. For the dreamers of the 20th century, it was the last wilderness, sealed away from the noise above. Even now, when satellites have mapped the planet down to the meter and the idea of a hollow world seems quaint, the story still flickers, not in science journals, but in art, in film, in quiet corners of imagination. Whenever a writer sends a hero underground, whenever a painter fills a canvas with light emerging from darkness, that same old heartbeat sounds again. What if there's more beneath us and within us? Because the truth is, the Hollow Earth has never really been about geology. It's been about the human condition, the sense that no matter how much we uncover, something within us remains uncharted. We dig mines and build machines, drill into ice and rock, and yet the deepest frontier is always inward. Beneath knowledge there is mystery. Beneath progress, a longing for silence. Beneath reason, a pulse that asks to dream. That's why the stories endure. They remind us that the unknown isn't something to fear, it's what keeps the world alive. The hollow earth is not a failure of science, it's a triumph of wonder. It shows that the imagination can build worlds where logic stops, and that those worlds, though invisible, can shape our reality just the same. If you think of it that way, every story is a kind of descent, not downward, but inward. We enter the darkness not to escape, but to remember. To rediscover that the light we've been chasing might already be glowing somewhere inside the hollow of our own hearts. And maybe that's the real center of the earth, not molten rock or magnetic storms, but a quiet beating core of curiosity. The same warmth that drove Halley to calculate, Sims to proclaim, Verne to write, and all of us to keep asking. The surface of the world is mapped, but the depths, the ones that lie in the imagination, are endless. By the late 19th century, the hollow earth had already left the laboratories. It had passed through telescopes and novels, and now it drifted into temples. What had begun as a scientific question was becoming something older, a sacred geography, whispered not by explorers, but by mystics. No one carried that transformation further than Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the Russian-born mystic who founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. To her, the earth was not a machine of rock and fire, but a living being layered with both matter and spirit. She spoke of hidden realms within it, Agartha, Shambhala, Patala, not physical places, but luminous planes of consciousness that only the awakened could reach. Blavatsky wrote of inner masters, enlightened beings who dwelled beneath the surface, guiding humanity's evolution in silence. She drew on legends from Tibet, India, and Central Asia, weaving them into a grand cosmology where every myth of the underworld was a memory of a spiritual homeland. In her view, the hollow earth was not empty, it was radiant, a sanctuary of light hidden beneath the illusions of the surface world. The names she used were ancient. Shambhala, the hidden kingdom of wisdom, had long been part of Tibetan and Mongolian lore, described in Buddhist texts as a realm of compassion and higher order, invisible to the impure. Agartha, a term drawn from Hindu and Buddhist roots, meant the inaccessible. It was said to lie within the earth, home to those who had transcended the cycle of suffering and no longer needed to live on the surface. To Western readers weary of materialism and the cold logic of industry, these stories felt like a kind of rescue. The world above was growing louder, faster, shallower. But beneath it, at least in imagination, there still existed silence, serenity, and wisdom untouched by time. It was not hard to see why theosophy spread so quickly among artists, philosophers, and wanderers. In the East, going down had never meant falling. In Hinduism and Buddhism alike, descent was a metaphor for awakening, for turning inward, peeling away illusion, descending into the depths of consciousness where truth resides. To meditate is to descend. To find enlightenment is to travel inward into the hollow space of the self. That inversion where down becomes up and the inner becomes higher than the outer captivated the Western imagination. Suddenly, the old fear of the underworld turned inside out. The place once thought to hold the dead became a cradle of the eternal. The descent into darkness became the path toward light. It was as though the planet itself had become a mandala, the surface a circle of illusion, and the center a still point of truth. And perhaps that's why, even now, the names Agartha and Shambhala still linger like distant bells. They are less about geography and more about direction, reminders that sometimes, to rise, one must first go down. After Blavatsky's death, her vision did not fade, it evolved. The idea of an inner world became a language shared by mystics, writers and travellers who no longer sought continents but consciousness. One of them was Joseph Saint-Yves d'Alvet, a French philosopher who claimed to have received revelations from within the earth itself. In 1886, he published Mission de l'Inde, describing a hidden kingdom called Agartha, ruled by wise adepts who preserved the world's ancient knowledge. To him, Agartha was not a myth, but a model of perfectly ordered society where science, art, and spirit existed in harmony. Its rulers, he said, communicated telepathically with enlightened minds on the surface, guiding the course of human civilization. Saint Yves never travelled to the east, but his vision borrowed deeply from its wisdom. In Hindu cosmology, Agartha, sometimes spelled Asgartha, meant unreachable, a place both hidden and eternal. By turning it into a metaphysical sanctuary, he gave Western mysticism something it had long lacked, a geography of the soul. The idea found its most enduring champion in Nicholas Roerich, the Russian painter, explorer, and philosopher who, in the early 20th century, led expeditions across Central Asia, searching for traces of Shambhala. To Roerich, the Himalayas were more than mountains, they were thresholds. He described valleys where prayer flags fluttered like veins of colour, where the silence felt alive, where even the wind seemed to speak of hidden kingdoms. In his journals, he wrote that Shambhala was not beneath us, but within us, in the higher consciousness of mankind. The beauty of these interpretations lies in their inversion. For centuries, Western thought had imagined heaven above and the underworld below, an axis of salvation and sin. But Blavatsky, Saint Yves and Roerich all turned that axis sideways. What if the divine was not above or below, but inside? What if descent and enlightenment were not opposites, but the same path seen from different directions? In Buddhism, the act of meditation is often described as entering the cave of the heart. In Hindu traditions, the yogi descends through layers of illusion maya to find the unchanging stillness at the center of the self. Even the Christian mystics spoke of a descent into the heart, a spiritual gravity pulling the soul toward its source. Across cultures, the journey inward is the oldest pilgrimage of all. Agartha and Shambhala became symbols of that shared map, not cities of gold beneath the soil, but radiant metaphors for the hidden harmony beneath the chaos of human life. They offered a counterpoint to the industrial century that had replaced silence with machinery and faith with formulas. To imagine a living light inside the earth was, in a way, to imagine that the world still had a soul. And perhaps that's why these stories lingered, outlasting the very movements that birthed them. Because even when the languages changed Sanskrit to French, Tibetan to English, the message remained the same. The deepest places are not reached by digging, but by listening. In every tradition that speaks of worlds beneath, there's a quiet paradox. To descend is not to fall, it is to awaken. When Western explorers heard of Shambhala or Agartha, they imagined caverns of gold, radiant cities under stone. But in the East, those same names pointed not downward, but inward to the unseen terrain of the mind. The journey to the inner world was never about breaking through rock, it was about breaking through illusion. To enter the earth, in this sense, is to return to the center, to the stillness that holds everything. In the Upanishads, sages describe the heart as a cave where the entire universe resides. In Tibetan Buddhism, the seeker visualizes descending into mountains of crystal and silence to meet the Buddha of light within. Even the mythic 7 layers of the underworld in Hindu cosmology are not punishments, but stages of purification, veils to be lifted, one by one, until only awareness remains. So when Blavatsky wrote of inner masters, or when Roerich painted mountains glowing with impossible light, they were not inventing a new geography. They were translating an old truth that the divine does not dwell above or beyond, but at the depth of things. And there's something profoundly human in that inversion. We spend our lives looking outward, toward stars, toward gods, toward destinations just beyond reach. But every once in a while, we are reminded that the path to transcendence curves inward, like gravity folding space toward a center. Even the earth itself seems to echo this design, a crust protecting layers of molten fire, heat hidden beneath coolness, motion concealed beneath stillness. Perhaps that is why the idea of a spiritual hollow feels so right, even when we know it isn't literal, because it reflects a deeper pattern that life, like the planet, holds its energy within. The outer world may dazzle us with distance, but meaning gathers in the depths. And so, when we hear the names Agartha or Shambhala, they sound less like locations and more like invitations to slow down, to turn inward, to descend into that quiet core where the noise of the surface finally fades. Maybe the hollow earth was never about what lies beneath the ground at all. Maybe it has always been about what awakens beneath awareness. There are places on earth where silence takes a shape. The poles are among them, vast white deserts where the horizon folds into itself, where the compass forgets which way to point. To most explorers, these regions are the edge of the known world. But to a few, they are something else entirely, doorways. In the winter of 1947, an American admiral named Richard Evelyn Byrd took flight over the North Pole on what was officially called a scientific mission. He had been here before, a pioneer of polar aviation, a hero of exploration, but this journey, according to a document that surfaced decades later, would be unlike any he had made before. The so-called secret diary of Admiral Byrd appeared in the 1950 seconds, published anonymously, claiming to be written in Byrd's own hand. Its pages described a flight into a world that shouldn't exist, one hidden beneath the ice, warm and green and alive. Historians dismissed it as a hoax, but readers couldn't look away. The diary begins, simply, February 19th, 1947. We are crossing the top of the world. Everything below is white, endless, eternal. Then the tone shifts. 9:15 hours, strange hue below, light of unusual colour. It should be snow, yet it glows softly with green and yellow tone. 9:30 instruments behave strangely. The compass spins, gyroscope oscillating. I cannot keep my heading steady. 9:45. The ground below is no longer ice. Byrd describes mountains that rise like emerald walls, rivers running through fields of moss and wildflowers. He notes a temperature of 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Then he writes of something impossible, giant animals moving in herds, creatures that look like mammoths grazing peacefully under a low golden Sunday. 10:15 radio contact lost. Everything silent. My men seem dazed, as if under influence of unseen force. And then, the entry takes its strangest turn. 10:30 city ahead. Impossible architecture, towers of glass and crystal, craft approaching, shaped like discs. They flank us gently. No hostility. My controls are no longer mine. Aircraft descending, as if guided. He writes of being brought into a luminous city, greeted by tall, radiant beings who call themselves the Ariani. They tell him that their world lies within the earth, safe from the surface's wars and noise. They speak of balance, of harmony, of how humanity above has lost its way. Admiral, they said, the time for your kind to return to reason is closing. The light of knowledge must never again be used for destruction. You have seen our world carry our warning. Byrd records that he was allowed to leave, escorted back to the surface. His plane, he says, reappeared hours later at a base hundreds of miles away. The official report listed the flight as routine, but his diary closes with one last, unsettling line. The secret world beneath the ice is real. I am forbidden to speak of it until the time is right. Whether those words ever passed his lips, no one knows. The document's origins remain uncertain, its paper unverified, its handwriting unproven. Yet somehow, it continues to ripple through time, passed from storyteller to seeker, like a message hidden in frost. Because deep down, there's something about the story that refuses to melt. Long after Byrd's supposed diary faded into rumour, the whispers around him only grew louder. In the winter of 1946, he led Operation High Jump, a massive US Navy expedition to Antarctica involving more than 4,000 men, 13 ships, and dozens of aircraft. Officially, it was a scientific and military training mission. Unofficially, few were convinced that was all. The operation was meant to last 8 months. It ended abruptly after just 8 weeks. The ships returned early. Byrd came home and gave a curious interview to the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio. In it, he warned that the United States should be prepared to defend itself against enemy aircraft that can fly from pole to pole at incredible speed. Those words ignited a storm. What enemy aircraft could he have seen in Antarctica? The Cold War had just begun. UFO sightings were entering the public imagination. Soon, the diary and the mission blurred together into a single legend that Admiral Byrd had not only seen another world beneath the ice, but had been silenced for it. Some said he had discovered an entrance to Agartha, guarded by beings far older than humankind. Others insisted it was a Nazi base that had survived the war hidden deep within glaciers. A few went further still, claiming that the strange craft Byrd described were not alien at all, but vehicles from that inner civilization, emerging to warn the surface world. No one could prove any of it. Yet the mystery persisted, nourished by half-truths and missing records. Parts of Operation High Jump's reports were classified for decades. Flight logs were incomplete. Byrd's own notes from the mission vanished after his death in 1957. In the vacuum of fact, imagination filled the sky. And perhaps that's what makes this story so haunting. The polar regions are already places of silence, expanses so vast that even sound seems afraid to travel. In that stillness, truth and myth become indistinguishable. When explorers speak of horizons that shimmer and vanish, of mirages glowing green against the ice, who can say where the optical ends and the mystical begins? There is a peculiar loneliness in these stories, a sense that the further we go from civilization, the more the Earth begins to speak in its own language again. Maybe that's why people still return to Byrd's name whenever a satellite loses signal over Antarctica, or when restricted airspaces appear on maps near the poles. It's not that they believe every word of the diary, it's that they want it to mean something, because buried inside this tale is a question older than any expedition. If there truly are places we're not meant to go, who decided that us, or the planet? Decades have passed since Admiral Byrd's final flight, yet his shadow still drifts across the polar sky. The man himself was buried with full honours, his medals gleaming like small suns. But the story the one whispered in hangars and late-night forums, printed in fading newsletters, and retold by voices that sound half asleep, refuses to rest. Some say the diary was written by someone else. Others swear it was genuine, hidden in family archives until it slipped quietly into the world. But perhaps the truth doesn't live in the paper at all. Perhaps it lives in the pause between belief and disbelief in that thin air where science meets silence. There's something about Byrd's story that feels the cold and warm at once. The cold of endless snow, the warmth of a secret too beautiful to be proven. When you read those words, the green land beneath the ice, the people of light, the message of peace, you can almost feel the engines hum, the white sky widen, the moment when the impossible stops being ridiculous and starts being real, if only for a breath. We may never know what Byrd saw, or didn't see, that winter morning, but his story endures, because it speaks to something we all sense when we look at the poles, that the edges of the world are not boundaries but mirrors. They reflect the longing we carry, that there is still somewhere unmeasured, still a door not yet closed. The ice keeps its secrets well. It folds sound, swallows memory, reshapes everything that dares to land upon it. Yet legends move differently. They sink beneath the surface, preserved by the same cold that buries bones and cities. Long after men are gone, the myths remain clear as frost, fragile as breath. And so the diary continues to circulate, drifting like snow between truth and dream. Maybe it was fiction, maybe it was prophecy, or maybe it was something rarer, a reminder that mystery too has a temperature, and that the coldest places can still burn with wonder. If this was only a legend, why does it still make us shiver? The story of the hollow earth should have ended long ago, folded away with myths and old maps. But every few decades it stirs again, like something shifting beneath the ice. In the early 2000s, a man named Rodney Clough revived the search. A quiet, deeply spiritual figure, Clough was convinced that the polar openings were real, not metaphors, not mistakes, but vast gateways waiting to be found. He wrote books, gave interviews, gathered a small community of believers who called themselves the Hollow Earth Expedition. Their goal was simple and impossible: to reach the North Pole, find the entrance, and document what lay beyond. The plan was ambitious: a chartered Russian icebreaker, satellite navigation, geophysical instruments, cameras ready to record history. Clough spoke of warmth beneath the ice, of a steady upward curve of the horizon, of magnetic anomalies that hinted at something more than snow and sea. They scheduled their journey for the summer of 2007. Dozens of supporters pledged to go. Websites tracked every update. And then, silence. The expedition never launched. The funding fell through. Some said Russian authorities refused access. Others whispered that someone higher had intervened. Within a year, the community dissolved into fragments, forums closed, blogs disappeared, pages went offline. But silence, in these stories, is never empty. It echoes. In the years that followed, new rumours surfaced. Satellite images showing circular cloud formations near the Arctic, radio operators reporting bursts of interference whenever planes crossed certain coordinates, pilots claiming brief moments of magnetic blackout near the poles. Every anomaly became a heartbeat in the myth proof that something beneath was still alive. Governments offered explanations: geomagnetic storms, atmospheric inversions, or data glitches, but to believers, the very act of denial was proof enough. Because when you spend years searching for an opening, even a closed door feels like confirmation. Somewhere in all this, between weather reports and whispers, is the truth of human curiosity. It doesn't end with answers. It ends with questions that refuse to die. The same instinct that drove Sims to lecture, that led Byrd to fly, that sent Clough to the edge of the ice still hums in all of us. The need to touch the unknown, even when the unknown doesn't reach back. And maybe that's why the myth keeps breathing. Because even now, in a century of satellites and live streams, there are still places where no one can go, where the GPS falters and the signal fades to static, and something in that silence feels deliberate. The poles remain off-limits in ways that logic cannot quite explain. Restricted zones, no-fly corridors, vanishing flights of geese that never return. The world may be mapped, but its borders still whisper. The Arctic silence has a way of becoming personal. Pilots talk about it the way their radios slip into static when they cross certain latitudes, how even the hum of the engines feels muffled, like sound itself is swallowed by the cold. Those who have been there describe it not as absence, but as presence, as if the world is listening back. The horizon stretches endlessly white, yet the air carries a faint vibration, a sound you can't quite locate but can somehow feel, like the pulse of a hidden machine. It's easy to understand why myths thrive here. In the polar night, truth freezes and reflection bends. Magnetic storms twist compasses, the aurora paints the sky in impossible colours, and the human mind, deprived of warmth and sleep, begins to see patterns in the static. Every flicker of green light, every echo in the radio, every brief lapse of navigation becomes a message. Rodney Clough once wrote that the poles are guarded by silence. He meant it poetically, but the phrase has outlived him, appearing on forums and in documentaries, carved into the margins of digital maps. Silence as a guardian, not keeping people out, but keeping something in. Governments deny that there are restricted zones, yet flight paths curve away from them all the same. Satellite imagery blurs, claiming technical error. Expeditions vanish from the news cycle before they begin. There's no conspiracy, perhaps just coincidence. But there's a particular kind of wonder born from coincidence, the kind that feels too precise to be chance. You can almost imagine it, a ship gliding through the mist, compasses spinning, instruments failing one by one, until only the heartbeat of the planet remains a low, steady hum beneath the ice. The crew listening, not speaking, afraid to break the spell, and in that soundless expanse a realization, maybe the hollow earth doesn't have to be real to be alive. Maybe the myth itself breathes, like frost on glass, vanishing when examined too closely, returning when the light dims. We think of silence as emptiness, but in the polar world, silence has texture, it holds weight, it remembers footsteps. Every gust of wind that crosses the pole carries stories we can't decode. Perhaps that's why people keep returning, risking cold and reason alike, because the unknown has its own gravity. The forbidden always calls the loudest. Over time, the stories fade not because they are disproven, but because the ice is patient. It waits long enough for people to forget. Then, one day, a rumour stirs again, like wind brushing across the surface, and someone else begins to plan a journey north. Most never leave the shore. The logistics crumble, permissions are denied, weather shifts. But even the silence of failure seems to belong to the myth. Every cancelled expedition becomes part of its rhythm, like the breath between heartbeats. There's a photograph that circulates online. A white horizon, a ship half buried in snow, its hull broken open like a ribcage. No one knows if it's real. No one knows where it was taken. Beneath the image, a caption reads, "They went searching for the entrance and found themselves instead." That, perhaps, is what all seekers of the hollow earth discover in the end. Not tunnels or caverns, but mirrors. The poles do not yield their secrets. They return questions in the language of frost. Why do we keep looking for a world beneath us, when the one around us is still mostly unexplored? Each unanswered question leaves a kind of beauty behind, a trace of wonder that no proof can replace. And in that beauty, there is a strange peace. The peace of knowing that some mysteries don't need to end. Rodney Clough eventually withdrew from public life. The last posts on his website are dated years apart. His words gentler, quieter. "Maybe," he wrote, "it's not about finding the opening anymore. Maybe it's about learning to listen to what the earth is already saying." He never found his portal, but perhaps that was never the point. Because sometimes the silence is the answer. And if you've ever stood in a place so still that you could hear your own heartbeat, you'll know the earth speaks softly, but only when we stop shouting. Maybe that's why the myth still endures, because beneath all the noise, there's a part of us that still wants to hear it breathe. In the 20th century, the dream of seeing the Earth's interior shifted from myth to machinery. The age of explorers gave way to the age of engineers. And yet, in its own way, the longing remained the same, to go deeper, to see what lies beneath the crust of certainty. Nowhere did that longing become more literal than in a remote corner of the Soviet Union, where in 1970, scientists began drilling a single hole into the Earth. It would become known as the Kola Superdeep Borehole, the deepest artificial point ever made by human hands. They wanted data, not treasure, not light, but sound. Each meter down brought back echoes of seismic noise, traces of minerals, whispers of ancient heat. The drilling continued for more than 2 decades, until the bit had bitten more than 12,200 meters below the surface, deeper than any ocean trench. What they found was not emptiness, it was pressure. The rock down there wasn't smooth or silent. It creaked, it moaned. At depths past 10 kilometers, the temperature soared beyond 180 degrees Celsius, far hotter than expected. Instruments began to fail. Lubricants boiled, metal warped. The deeper they went, the more the Earth seemed to resist, as if warning that the boundary between knowledge and hubris had been crossed. When the project stopped in 1992, the hole was sealed not because they had found anything forbidden, but because they had reached the limits of what human technology could endure. And yet, legends still cling to it. Some say workers heard screams from below, that microphones picked up faint wails, like souls in torment. There is no record of that, only the human instinct to turn difficulty into drama, data into ghost. In truth, what the scientists found was far stranger than fiction. Fossilized plankton embedded in rock 3 billion years old, layers of crust that contradicted existing models, microscopic traces of water where none should exist. Even at 12 kilometers deep, life had left fingerprints. It turns out the Earth's story is written in layers too slow for eyes to see a diary etched in stone, turned page by pressure and time. Seismologists and physicists still listen to it today. With networks of sensors circling the globe, they record the planet's low-frequency hum, a constant vibration too deep for ears to hear. Some call it Earth's music. Others call it the breath of the planet. There's something strangely comforting about that. Even after centuries of drilling, measuring, calculating, the Earth remains partly unknown, not hollow, but alive. Its mysteries are quieter now, encoded in heat, magnetism, and rhythm. The hollow Earth may not exist beneath our feet, but something equally haunting does. A living planet, speaking like breath turned to stone, the molten core generating the magnetic field that keeps the sky itself intact. It's not an empty world, but a furnace of life's protection, a steady heart beating for everything that lives above it. And yet, for all we've learned, we still know so little. The deepest we've ever reached, that narrow borehole in Kola, is barely 1/3 of 1% of the distance to the core. It's like scratching the paint on a cathedral dome and trying to describe the fresco inside. Still, science keeps listening. Satellites orbit overhead, measuring the planet's magnetic pulse. Seismic arrays hum quietly beneath deserts and oceans. The Earth vibrates endlessly, like an instrument strummed by invisible hands. Every quake, every storm, every tide adds to the rhythm, a resonance that scientists can record but never fully translate. They call it the Earth's hum, a constant sound that surrounds us but sits just below the threshold of hearing. It has no beginning and no end. It reminds us that even solid ground is never truly still, that we are standing on a moving, breathing thing. And perhaps that is where myth and science meet most clearly in reverence. For all its data and equations, science at its best is not the opposite of wonder. It is its continuation. The people who listen to the planet with seismographs are not so different from those who once listened through story. Both are trying to hear the same voice, the voice of the world beneath our feet. Maybe the hollow Earth was never about empty space. Maybe it was a way of saying that the Earth still has depths we haven't reached, not just physically, but emotionally, imaginatively. That it's possible to live on this planet for millennia and still not know its whole story. So we listen to the faint vibrations, to the quiet heat rising through the mantle, to the long, slow rhythm of a planet that has outlived everything that's ever walked upon it. The Earth isn't hollow, but it is alive, and every now and then, when the wind stops and the world goes still, you can almost feel it, that deep, slow pulse of stone. Maybe that's what we've been hearing all along. The hollow Earth, as science tells us, doesn't exist, but beneath the surface, another truth quietly unfolds, one that's just as strange and far more real. The planet is not hollow, but it is honeycombed, a labyrinth of caverns, tunnels, rivers and voids carved by time and pressure. For most of history, those places were darkness itself, unseen, untouched, feared. The underworld may not have gods or giants, but it has always belonged to mystery. Modern explorers, armed with headlamps and oxygen tanks, have found that the Earth's interior hums with life. In 2018, a group of researchers from the Deep Carbon Observatory estimated that the total mass of living organisms beneath the surface may outweigh all life above it. Microbes thriving miles underground, feeding not on sunlight, but on the chemical energy of stone. It sounds impossible, yet it's true. In deep mines, Scientists have found bacteria that live off hydrogen and sulfur. They're tiny metabolisms powered by the slow decay of radioactive elements. They survive in temperatures above 120 degrees Celsius, in pressures that would crush any surface creature, in water that hasn't touched the air for millions of years. Down there, sunlight is a rumour. Life doesn't glow, it endures. At the Mponeng gold mine in South Africa, more than 2 miles underground, researchers discovered a single species of bacteria, Desulforudis audaxviata, living in complete isolation, cut off from the rest of Earth's ecosystem. It survives by extracting energy from uranium's natural radiation, converting decay into life, a creature that feeds on the bones of the planet itself. To some scientists, this is a window into the deep past, what life might have looked like billions of years ago, before the oceans knew light. To others, it's a preview of what might still exist on other worlds, in the crust of Mars, in the icy moons of Jupiter, in the places where warmth hides below the cold. And as you listen to these discoveries, you realize something. The idea of a hollow Earth was not entirely wrong. The emptiness we imagined was not a void, but a vessel. The Earth is alive inside, it just breathes differently. Caves and caverns, microbial colonies and mineral veins, all part of a vast unseen network where time moves slower, where life has learned to speak the language of stone. If you've ever stepped into a cave and felt the air grow colder, the sound of your breath echo, the pulse of water dripping in the dark, you felt it too, the sense that this world beneath the world is awake, maybe not hollow, but inhabited. There are places on this planet that feel less like landscapes and more like doorways, places where the surface breaks and the world opens inward. One of them lies in the jungles of central Vietnam, Hang Son Dong, the largest cave on Earth. Its name means mountain river cave, but that barely captures its scale. The main chamber is so vast that a Boeing 747 could fly through it. Clouds form inside. Whole forests grow beneath its ceiling of limestone and light. When explorers first entered it in 2009, they described a silence that felt alive, not empty, but breathing. The cave's river flows through tunnels carved over millions of years, while daylight filters in through collapsed ceilings, painting jungles of ferns in misty green. You can stand inside Son Doong and watch rain fall in slow motion, droplets catching beams of sunlight that should never have reached this far. It feels like another planet, and yet it's ours hidden beneath our own feet. Geologists believe that caves like Son Doong act as the planet's slow lungs. Rainwater seeps through cracks, carrying oxygen, minerals, and life. Air moves in rhythms tied to weather and tides, pulsing softly through openings and chambers. When you breathe inside a cave, you are breathing with the earth itself. Across the world, these subterranean worlds repeat the same quiet miracle. In Mexico's Cave of Crystals, gigantic selenite pillars, some over 30 feet long, shimmer in air hotter than a sauna. The crystals took 500,000 years to grow, fed by the Earth's slow chemistry. In Iceland, lava tubes twist like arteries beneath frozen plains, carrying heat and gas from deep inside the mantle. In New Mexico, the Carlsbad caverns stretch for miles, stalactites dripping like frozen time. Each of these caverns tells a part of the same story, not of emptiness, but of creation. Where myth once imagined lost cities and glowing suns, reality offers something gentler, a living architecture sculpted by patience, shaped by water, gravity, and time. Scientists call these systems the Earth's subsurface biosphere. It's not poetic, but it's no less astonishing. In some of these caves, microbes form mats that shimmer under ultraviolet light, feeding on minerals. In others, blind fish and translucent insects navigate by touch alone, guided by faint vibrations that humans can't perceive. The deeper you go, the older everything becomes. Air that hasn't moved in 10,000 years. Rocks that remember the birth of continents. Silence so dense it feels like a sound you forgot how to hear. You realize then the hollow earth was never a fantasy, it was a premonition, not of space beneath us, but of the life and mystery that were always there, waiting for our eyes to adjust to the dark. For centuries, we imagined the world beneath us as a kingdom of myth filled with lost races, crystal towers, hidden suns. But the truth, as science quietly revealed, is more modest and somehow more miraculous. We didn't find angels or giants. We found microbes, single cells, humming with persistence in the dark. We found water trapped in stone, carrying whispers of life's earliest chemistry. We found silence that is never truly silent, only slow, breathing through minerals and pressure. In the end, the inner earth turned out not to be a mirror of human imagination, but a lesson in humility. Life doesn't need light to grow. It doesn't need sky or ocean or comfort. It only needs possibility, a tiny crack in the rock, a trace of energy, a chance. And maybe that's the most astonishing revelation of all, that the same planet which cradles forests and cities also shelters invisible civilizations of microbes far below, working in endless dark, recycling the chemistry of existence. Without them, the surface would falter. Every breath we take owes something to the quiet labor of the unseen. The hollow earth may have been a myth, but its spirit, the idea that something alive, intelligent, and enduring exists beneath us, was right in its own way. We just needed to look smaller and longer, because in every cave, every fissure, every droplet of water that moves through stone, there is life tenacious, ancient, and utterly unbothered by our curiosity. When you stand at the mouth of a cave and feel the cool air drift upward, you're not standing above emptiness. You're standing above history, above ecosystems older than memory, above a universe that hums invisibly beneath your feet. Perhaps that is what the hollow earth was trying to tell us all along, that the world inside is not a place but a truth, that life finds a way to exist wherever there is even the faintest spark of warmth. Maybe the real inner earth isn't beneath us at all. Maybe it's within every pulse of life that endures in the dark. Quiet, unseen, but endlessly alive. Every myth, if you listen closely enough, eventually starts speaking about us. The story of the hollow earth was never just about geography. It was about the longing for a center, the idea that beneath all the chaos and surface noise, something still and luminous waits below. Carl Jung once wrote that every descent in mythology is a reflection of the human psyche. To enter the underworld is to confront what lies beneath awareness, fear, memory, desire, shadow. In that darkness, transformation happens. It is not punishment, it is discovery. So perhaps when we dreamed of an inner world beneath the crust, we were really dreaming of ourselves, of the layers we have yet to reach. The caves, the tunnels, the cities of light, all metaphors for the mind's interior, the hidden landscapes of consciousness. In psychology, this journey is called the descent into the unconscious. It appears in every culture under different names. The Orphic descent to Hades, the Buddhist retreat into the cave of the heart, the Native American vision quest, where the seeker enters the earth to meet the spirits within. Even modern therapy borrows the same language, going deeper, digging inward, facing what lies below. When we descend, we don't just face darkness, we find meaning there, because the self, like the planet, is not solid all the way through. We have layers of reason, emotion, instinct, memory, each pressing gently against the next. And somewhere at the core is something molten, something untamed and alive. Maybe that's why the myth of the hollow earth has endured for so long. It doesn't just describe a planet, it describes a person. The sense that we too are worlds within worlds, each of us containing a silent, glowing center that the surface never sees. To reach it, we have to go down, not to escape, but to understand. And perhaps that's the real invitation of this myth, not to believe in a hollow planet, but to believe in the depth of our own being. To trust that somewhere beneath the noise of thought and the sediment of habit, there's a pulse that still belongs to the original self, steady, wordless, waiting to be rediscovered. In nearly every myth we've ever told, the path to light begins with descent. Orpheus goes down into the underworld to bring back love. Dante descends through circles of fire before glimpsing the stars again. Even the Buddha sits beneath a tree and turns inward, descending through layers of thought until the last illusion dissolves. It's strange how universal the pattern is. To reach the sacred, we must first go down. The hollow earth theory, in its wild and accidental way, echoed that truth. It told of a hidden world not above the clouds but beneath our feet. And though it spoke of caverns and suns, what it really described was transformation. The descent is never about finding something new. It's about seeing what has always been there, waiting. Psychologists sometimes describe the human mind as a planet too crusted with habits, fault-lined with emotion, warmed by an inner core of instinct and intuition. We build our civilizations on the surface, words, routines, identities, but beneath them, tectonic plates of thought keep moving. The deeper you go, the more the structures melt. That's where truth hides, not in certainty, but in surrender. When ancient mystics spoke of Agartha or Shambhala, maybe they were describing that same inner landscape, the luminous city of understanding that only appears when the old world has been stripped away. In the language of the soul, the journey downward is not exile, it's return. And in that sense, we are all explorers of hollow worlds, not beneath the crust, but beneath our own noise. Every time we pause long enough to listen in silence, in meditation, in grief, in wonder, we open a small entrance into that inner earth. And what we find there is not emptiness, but radiance. It doesn't roar, it glows. That soft light that Jung called individuation, the moment when the unconscious and the conscious finally meet, when shadow and self become whole again. That is the city beneath us, the one built not of stone or sun, but of understanding. Perhaps the explorers and mystics were not so different after all. One sought the North Pole, the other the soul's pole. Both believed there was something more within, and both were right, in their own language. Because the deeper we go, the brighter it becomes. Maybe that's what the hollow earth was always trying to say. Not that there is another world beneath us, but that there is another world within us. A place untouched by noise or daylight, where thought slows down and feeling begins to echo. A landscape of memory, intuition, and quiet recognition. A place that doesn't ask to be proven, only remembered. In that sense, every myth of descent, every underworld, every hidden city, every glowing core, is a parable about returning to wholeness, about peeling away the surface until only the essential remains. Think of it like this. The planet's surface is loud, bright, restless, a reflection of our waking mind. But below it lies the mantle, heavy and slow, where ancient heat moves without haste. Deeper still, the core spins in silence, unseen yet holding the magnetic field that keeps life possible. The same pattern lives inside us. At the surface, we speak and act and rush. Beneath that, emotion churns, thought crystallizes, and some connection to the planet, to ourselves. To every explorer who has ever stood at the edge of a mystery and whispered, "I want to see what's below," because that longing, the one that built the stories, launched the expeditions, lit the torches and the telescopes, was never about the Earth at all. It was about us. We are the hollow world. We are the explorers still descending. And somewhere, in that silent depth we carry, something ancient is still shining. Like the molten heart of a planet that refuses to go dark. We've mapped the Earth. We've measured its gravity, drilled into its crust, traced its magnetic pulse across the poles. And yet, in some quiet part of ourselves, we're still digging. Why? Maybe because the act of searching has never really been about proof. It's about hope. About believing that the world still has secrets left that the next discovery, no matter how small, could change the way we see everything. In an age where satellites photograph every corner of the planet, mystery feels like an endangered species. But the human mind is clever. When the outer world becomes known, we turn inward, building new myths, new questions, new what-ifs. The hollow earth, Atlantis, alien megastructures, quantum consciousness. They all spring from the same root, a quiet refusal to believe that existence is finished explaining itself. There's comfort in that, a strange kind of tenderness, because to believe in the impossible, even for a moment, is to believe that we still matter, that the universe is still speaking, and that someone, somewhere, is listening. Skeptics call it delusion, scientists call it curiosity misdirected, but maybe it's neither. Maybe it's the emotional heartbeat of our species, the thing that once made us look up at stars, cross oceans, split atoms, and now, in the hush of midnight, scroll through theories that promise we haven't reached the end. We dig because the surface never feels like enough. Even when reason tells us that the earth is solid, that the underworld is made of molten metal and stone, something in us still whispers, what if there's more? It's not stupidity, it's longing. The longing for a world that still hides surprises, for a story that hasn't told its final page. And maybe that's what all myths are, echoes of a very old hunger, not for knowledge, but for wonder. In that way, the believers and the skeptics are not enemies at all. They're two halves of the same mind. One demands truth, the other demands meaning. And between them, the world keeps turning solid, mysterious, endlessly unfinished. We live in an age that knows too much. Every mountain has a name, every comet an orbit, every secret a data point waiting to be explained. And yet, somehow, the more we know, the more we crave what cannot be known. It's not rebellion, it's balance. Our ancestors looked into the sky and filled its darkness with gods. We look into our screens and fill the silence with theories. Both acts come from the same ache, the desire to feel that there is something larger than the map, something unmeasured, watching back. In psychology, they call it existential compensation, the idea that mystery fills the space where certainty runs out. When the world feels too predictable, we turn to wonder to make it feel alive again. The hollow earth, the UFO, the simulation theory, each is a different costume for the same longing. The need to believe that life isn't just a closed equation, but a story still unfolding. Because when we strip away all the logic, what remains is loneliness. The loneliness of living on a planet that spins in silence through endless night, knowing that the stars don't answer back. And so we build our answers, glowing cities inside the earth, secret civilizations beneath the ice, portals at the poles, not because we're fools, but because we're storytellers. And stories make the void bearable. Even science, at its core, is an act of faith. Faith that the universe is understandable, that nature plays fair, that truth can be touched if we reach far enough. That's not so different from the believer praying that light still lives in the dark. The myth survives because it gives us a place to put our wonder. And in a world drowning in certainty, wonder is oxygen. So we keep digging not just into the ground, but into the unknown places of our own hearts. We dig because we are afraid of silence, and also because, somewhere deep down, we love it. Maybe the believers and the scientists, the dreamers and the skeptics are all digging toward the same thing, a kind of meaning that data alone can't provide, a warmth that equations can't hold, a heartbeat beneath the numbers, still steady, still human. Perhaps we keep digging because we still want to feel small in the good way, to be reminded that the universe is larger than our worries, older than our mistakes, and still full of stories that haven't found us yet. Maybe curiosity is the gentlest kind of faith, the belief that something worth knowing is still waiting below the surface. There's a quiet courage in that, to keep searching even when you know the map is almost full, to keep asking questions even when you suspect the answers won't arrive. We call it obsession, but it's really devotion. Devotion to the unfinished, to the unseen, to the beauty that refuses to be pinned down. It's what turns stargazers into astronomers, wanderers into explorers, storytellers into historians. Some dig for gold, some for fossils, some for light. But beneath every shovel, every theory, every whisper of "what if" lies the same desire to touch something pure. Because there is a kind of hunger that facts can't feed, the hunger to be surprised again. And maybe that's the truest form of life, to never stop being surprised. The myth of the hollow earth endures not because it's true, but because it reminds us how it feels to wonder. To imagine warmth beneath the ice, to believe that somewhere, in the depths we cannot see, there's still a glow waiting for us to find it. We dig not to escape the world, but to stay connected to its mystery, because without mystery, even truth would lose its warmth. And maybe that's the secret the earth has been keeping all along. Not a hidden city, not a shining sun, but the quiet assurance that as long as we keep searching, we'll never truly be lost. If you sit quietly enough, the planet speaks. Not in words or wind, but in the low, steady rhythm beneath your feet, a sound too deep for ears, but not for feeling. Geophysicists call it microsisms, the vibration of waves and storms echoing through the crust. But to anyone who listens long enough, it feels like something else, like a pulse. The heartbeat of a living world. It's easy to forget, amid the noise of engines and screens, that the earth is not still. Even now the crust flexes with tides pulled by the moon. Mountains exhale dust, oceans breathe in and out. Every river, every gust of wind, every tremor in the deep is part of a single slow rhythm that began long before we arrived and will go on long after we are gone. Maybe that's why we tell stories about hidden worlds and secret suns. Maybe, deep down, we've always sensed this pulse and needed a way to name it. The hollow earth, for all its absurdities, was our way of listening, our way of saying, we know there's something alive down there. And we were right. Not in the way we imagined, with glowing cities and lost civilizations, but in a quieter, truer way. The life inside the planet is smaller, older, gentler microbes, minerals, heat, pressure, all dancing to the same internal rhythm. It doesn't sparkle or shout, it hums. And maybe, if you let yourself, you can hum along. So here we are, at the end of this journey, not standing above the world, but within it. Every heartbeat you feel, every breath you take, is part of the same motion that moves mountains and tides. We are not visitors here. We are part of the pulse. Maybe there is no need to dig anymore. Maybe the real discovery is this, that the earth is not a mystery to be solved, but a companion to be heard. And if you're hearing this from somewhere on our small shared planet, maybe from a city balcony, a mountain road, a quiet room by the sea, take a moment to listen, because right now, this very second, the earth is breathing beneath you. If you close your eyes, you might feel it. If you listen long enough, you might even hear it. And if you do, tell me where you are. Not because I need to know, but because it's beautiful to be reminded that somewhere out there, across this wide, turning world, you're still here, listening with the earth.